On April 15, 1943, over the gray skies of Belgium at nearly 25,000 feet, Oberleutnant Hermann Keller, a veteran pilot of Jagdgeschwader 26, was flying his Focke-Wulf FW-190 on a patrol mission. The cold was biting, and the thin air made every breath a struggle, but for Keller and the other German pilots, this was routine. They were accustomed to fighting at this altitude, where German aircraft like the Bf-109G and FW-190A still retained optimal maneuverability. German pilots prided themselves on their skill, believing that elite training and precise marksmanship would determine victory in the skies over Europe. However, that day, what Keller saw a few miles to the west made his heart sink. A formation of American planes was approaching, strange-looking heavy aircraft that seemed larger than anything Keller had ever seen. Unlike the P-38 Lightnings or P-40 Warhawks occasionally mentioned in reports, these were P-47 Thunderbolts, a fighter type Germany had never encountered in combat. On the Luftwaffe's aircraft recognition charts, there was no symbol for this type at all. Keller immediately realized that the American planes maintained an impressive altitude, beyond what German pilots considered safe or optimal for dogfighting. They flew in a tight formation, about 12 aircraft at over 7,000 meters, maintaining a stable, precise structure. This instantly applied pressure on Keller and his comrades. An unusual sense spread through the German formation, not fear, but a deep awareness that they were facing something entirely different in combat philosophy. The truly terrifying moment came when the lead P-47 suddenly opened fire. This was not the familiar burst from 20mm or 13mm cannons that German pilots had encountered. It was a massive, continuous, synchronized hail from 850 caliber machine guns mounted on the wings. Keller watched as a fellow pilot's FW-190 absorbed around 40 rounds in under 2 seconds. But it did not explode or ignite immediately. Instead, it disintegrated piece by piece, turning into scattered metal debris in mid-air. This first engagement was a severe shock for the Luftwaffe. German pilots had been trained to believe that 20mm cannons represented the future of air combat, capable of downing an enemy aircraft with just a few precise shots. They spent thousands of hours practicing deflection shooting, honing the skill of hitting moving targets with pinpoint accuracy. All that was needed was 1 or 2 well-placed shells to bring down an aircraft. The P-47 shattered all those assumptions. American pilots, like Major Donald Blakesley, did not aim to hit each shot precisely. Instead, they applied a philosophy of damage through overwhelming firepower. Every trigger pull unleashed all 8 guns simultaneously, firing over 100 rounds per second, creating a lethal zone that any aircraft entering it had little chance of surviving. Mathematically, a P-47 with 350 rounds per gun could fire nearly 2,800 bullets in a short engagement, equivalent to 171 pounds of metal and explosive compounds raining down on the enemy within 15 seconds. The German pilots watched in astonishment. Not only did they fail to destroy the P-47, but none of their familiar tactics worked. German aircraft, which relied on speed, maneuverability, and precise shooting positions, were suddenly ineffective. The P-47, despite its large size, could maneuver at altitudes that German planes struggled with, thanks to its powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine and turbo supercharger. While Bf-109s and FW-190s became slow and hard to control above 22,000 feet, the P-47 could attack from above, dive at nearly 500 mph, and then use its momentum to climb back to its original altitude, ready for another strike. Furthermore, it was not just firepower but psychological impact. German pilots were accustomed to calculating each shot and every tactical maneuver to conserve ammunition. Now they faced a continuous wall of fire where every passing second threatened their lives. Survivors of early encounters recounted that the P-47's guns sounded like a death sentence, each burst a reminder that they no longer dominated the skies. This first encounter was not just a single battle, It highlighted a profound difference in design philosophy and tactics. Germany focused on quality, precision, and individual skill, while the Americans relied on industrial strength and overwhelming firepower. As German pilots saw P-47s shred their comrades' planes, they realized they were facing not just a powerful aircraft, but the might of an industry capable of mass production. Keller recorded in his combat report that the sight would haunt Luftwaffe pilots for the rest of the war. This initial engagement signaled a fundamental shift in air combat. It was no longer a duel of sky knights relying on skill and precision. Instead, victory depended on production capacity, abundant ammunition, and sustained firepower. For Keller and his comrades, it was a brutal awakening. They understood that in the era of industrial warfare, individual prowess could not match production strength and overwhelming firepower. A P-47 was not just a fighter, it was a symbol of American industrial strategy, where every bullet, gun, and flight hour was calculated to ensure total dominance over the enemy. Immediately after this encounter, the Luftwaffe began recording the psychological and tactical losses caused by the P-47. German pilots had to change their approach, avoiding direct engagements and focusing on survival rather than victory. Keller's first confrontation demonstrated that the P-47 did not merely destroy German planes, it dismantled the entire combat mindset they had trusted for years. In the short term, this engagement was a technical and psychological shock. In the long term, it marked a turning point in the air war over Europe. The P-47 Thunderbolt, with its 8 machine guns and philosophy of overwhelming firepower, ushered in a new era where industrial strength and mass production determined the outcome of war rather than just individual skill and traditional tactics. When German pilots first witnessed the P-47 Thunderbolt open fire, they were not only surprised by its speed and maneuverability, but also overwhelmed by its sheer firepower. The Luftwaffe's tradition relied on 20mm and 13mm cannons to destroy a target with just a few precise hits. A veteran German pilot could aim within seconds, calculate deflection angles and the enemy aircraft's speed, and fire 1 or 2 accurate rounds to down a plane. This was a philosophy of combat based on precision and individual skill, where every bullet was precious and none could be wasted. The P-47 Thunderbolt shattered all these principles. Each P-47 was equipped with 8 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, each firing 800 rounds per minute, totaling up to 6,400 rounds per minute, or more than 100 rounds per second. Unlike the German philosophy, the Americans did not focus on precise single shots, but created a wide field of fire, a death grid that any aircraft entering it had almost no chance of surviving. At standard combat range, about 200-300 yards, the 8 guns created a rectangular zone roughly 8 by 12 feet, where any aircraft was at risk of being shredded into metal fragments. A P-47 carried 350 rounds per gun, totaling 2,800 rounds for all 8. In a continuous 15-second burst, the aircraft could unleash over 1,600 rounds, equivalent to 171 pounds of metal and explosive compounds fired at the enemy. By contrast, a Bf-109G carried only 150 rounds for its 20mm cannon and 300 rounds for 2 13mm machine guns, creating a stark disparity in sustained firepower. The P-47's armament allowed American pilots to fire multiple volleys during a single engagement, while German pilots had to carefully ration each shot to avoid running out of ammunition. This overwhelming fire philosophy was the decisive difference between American and German air combat. While German pilots trained for thousands of hours to perfect precise shooting, the Americans relied on massive ammunition as a strategic weapon. Any pilot approaching a P-47 faced a torrent of bullets where individual skill became almost irrelevant. Colonel Robert S. Johnson, a P-47 pilot with 27 victories, explained, "We didn't try to aim precisely. Every trigger pull was meant to create guaranteed destruction. That's the philosophy of overwhelming fire, not precision." It was this firepower that allowed P-47s to down multiple German aircraft in a single engagement, drastically reducing enemy survival rates. Moreover, the psychological aspect of combat was completely transformed. German pilots, accustomed to calculating each shot, now faced a relentless hail of fire where every moment threatened their lives. Many described watching their comrades' planes shredded before their eyes, with no chance to bail out, no way to escape. The psychological pressure created a lingering fear, later referred to in post-war documents as P-47 nerves. Survivors learned to avoid direct confrontations, evade the lethal zone, and only attack when the enemy was isolated or disadvantaged. Another factor enhancing the P-47's firepower was its tactical use from high altitude. The aircraft could dive from 30,000 feet at speeds up to 500 mph, unleash all 8 guns on a German aircraft, and then use momentum to climb back to its original altitude. German pilots called this death from above, as there was no counter. The P-47's large size, once considered a drawback, became an advantage in dive and climb tactics. Additionally, the P-47 was designed to withstand multiple hits while remaining airborne. In early encounters, German pilots observed Allied planes pierced by dozens of rounds, yet not exploding immediately. This contrasted sharply with German philosophy, where a few well-placed hits were enough to down a plane. The P-47's durability, combined with overwhelming firepower, made German aircraft nearly ineffective in conventional engagements. Another aspect that made the P-47's firepower formidable was the combination with massive industrial production. Each M2 machine gun and 50 caliber ammunition supply was produced in quantity, ensuring plentiful rounds for every engagement, unlike German pilots, who often had to worry about limited ammo and fuel. Firepower was not only a physical force, but also a psychological weapon, allowing American pilots to attack confidently and continuously without counting shots. American tactics combining firepower and altitude created devastating effects in group combat. A squadron of P-47s could strike simultaneously, forming a wall of fire that German planes could not penetrate. While German pilots relied on individual skill and attacked one plane at a time, P-47 squadrons used collective strength to overwhelm and destroy entire formations in minutes. As a result, from the very first encounters, German pilots recognized that the firepower disparity could not be overcome by personal skill. Luftwaffe instructors and veteran pilots noted that the P-47 destroyed not only aircraft, but also their tactics and morale. Survivors described facing a P-47 as being shredded before they could react, a situation that no personal skill could overcome. Ultimately, the P-47's firepower did more than change battle outcomes. It reshaped how American and German pilots perceived air combat. The Americans demonstrated that quantity and overwhelming fire could compensate for skill gaps, while the Germans realized that precision and personal ability were no longer decisive. The P-47 was not merely a fighter plane, it embodied the philosophy of industrial warfare, where every shot was calculated, every bullet served the overall victory, and every enemy pilot faced relentless, inescapable pressure. One of the factors that made the P-47 Thunderbolt so terrifying to the Luftwaffe was not only its overwhelming firepower, but also its superior high-altitude performance. While German pilots were accustomed to fighting below 20,000 feet, where the Bf-109G and FW-190 performed optimally, the P-47 opened up an entirely new combat envelope where German pilots could barely maintain control or speed. The P-47 was powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WASP engine with an advanced turbo supercharger, producing 2,300 horsepower at altitudes where German engines had already begun to lose power significantly. This allowed the P-47 to accelerate and maneuver effectively at 25,000 feet, altitudes where most German aircraft could operate only at limited performance. Even with MW-50 methanol water injection to boost output, the Bf-109G struggled to maintain speed and maneuverability above 22,000 feet. The FW-190OA, formidable at medium altitude, became heavy and sluggish above 22,000 feet, losing the agility crucial in dogfights. German pilots, accustomed to horizontal or lower-level engagements, now faced dominance from above. P-47s could attack from 30,000 feet, dive at nearly 500 mph, unleash all 8 guns, and then use their momentum to climb back to 25,000 feet, ready for the next strike. This created a decisive energy advantage. Potential energy from high altitude converted into speed and maneuverability that German aircraft could not match. Major Egon Mayer, commander of 3JG-2 and developer of tactics for direct attacks on bomber formations, wrote in a tactical report, "Above 7,500 meters, the advantage completely favored the Thunderbolt. They maneuvered freely while we struggled with nearly frozen controls. They attacked from above without effective response, then climbed back to safety before we could retaliate." The P-47's high-altitude capability was not just a speed and maneuverability advantage, it was a psychological weapon. German pilots, who relied on a Sky Knight ethos of defeating enemies through personal skill and precise tactics, now faced an opponent consistently higher, faster, and capable of continuous fire from above. German pilots described P-47 attacks as death from above, where neither position nor speed of the American aircraft could be predicted, and no skill could help them escape the synchronized hail of bullets. Another important factor was the P-47's large weight, initially considered a disadvantage. Fully loaded at 14 tons with fuel and armament, the P-47 could accelerate powerfully during a dive, reaching speeds higher than any German aircraft descending from high altitude. Simultaneously, this weight provided stability while firing all 8 guns, ensuring accurate targeting during sustained volleys. Combined with engine power and the turbo supercharger, this created an aircraft ideally suited for high-altitude combat, where German planes lost nearly all advantage. The R-2800 engine and turbo supercharger provided not only absolute power, but also smooth aerodynamic control at altitudes where the Bf-109 and FW-190 struggled, reducing vibration and allowing the guns to fire continuously without mechanical failure. This explains why the P-47 could unleash multiple consecutive volleys, overwhelming any Luftwaffe tactics. Additionally, the P-47's aerodynamic design optimized climb-to-dive ratios and maximum speed. With broad wings, a robust fuselage, and advanced control systems, pilots could change altitude flexibly while maintaining accurate fire. This allowed American pilots not only to dominate in firepower, but also to exploit energy tactics, choosing when to attack and disengage, a maneuver German pilots could rarely replicate. The combination of powerful engines, optimized aerodynamics, and heavy combat weight made the P-47 an ideal high-altitude fighter, where the Luftwaffe was almost completely powerless. German pilots reported that above 7,500 meters, traditional tactics like dogfighting, close pursuit, and head-on attacks became meaningless, while the P-47 maintained maneuverability and overwhelming fire effortlessly. American tactics exploiting this advantage were called the high-altitude bounce. P-47s used extreme altitude to dive into enemy formations, fire all 8 guns, then climb back to safe altitude. A dive from 30,000 feet to 15,000 feet generated sufficient speed and momentum to climb back to 25,000 feet without using full engine power. German aircraft, lacking the engine strength and turbo systems, could not climb back quickly, resulting in heavy losses of both planes and pilots. A notable example was the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid in August 1943, when P-47 squadrons escorted B-17s deep into German airspace, using the high-altitude bounce to dominate German pilots. Luftwaffe observers reported that the Thunderbolts did not just shoot down aircraft, they suppressed morale, forcing German pilots to withdraw as soon as they were spotted from a distance. Engagements showed P-47s firing accurately from long range while maintaining speed and advantageous positioning, creating devastating losses for Germany. The high-altitude superiority and design also had lasting psychological effects. German pilots recalled that merely hearing the P-47 engines overhead caused tension, knowing that even a small mistake could result in instant death. Post-war Luftwaffe documents referred to this as P-47 nerves, where pilots reacted to sounds similar to P-47 gunfire with extreme stress or survival reflexes. Thanks to its optimized design, the P-47 not only dominated air-to-air combat, but also enabled new ground attack tactics. At appropriate altitudes, the aircraft could dive to strike vehicles, trains, and strategic targets without fear of counterattack, leveraging both maneuverability and synchronized firepower. In summary, the P-47's optimal design, powerful engine, turbo supercharger, smart aerodynamics, heavy combat weight, and 8 50-caliber machine guns produced an aircraft nearly perfect for high-altitude combat. It shattered all Luftwaffe conventional tactics, dominating in firepower and energy, and changed how aerial warfare was conducted in Europe. As a result, the P-47 was not just a fighter plane. It was a symbol of industrial warfare, where superior power, production, and design determined combat outcomes, rather than relying solely on individual skill or precision. German pilots realized they were facing not only a more powerful aircraft, but a new way of waging war, where industrial advantage and strategic design mattered more than any Sky Knight could. When the P-47 Thunderbolt appeared over the skies of Europe, it didn't just change aerial combat, it completely upended the Luftwaffe's mindset and tactics. Before the P-47, German pilots relied on personal skill, precise tactics, and the ability to bring down a target with 1 or 2 well-placed cannon shots. They saw themselves as Sky Knights, elite pilots capable of controlling a battle through skill and finesse. But the arrival of the P-47, with its 8 synchronized machine guns firing continuously, rendered these principles meaningless, creating an unprecedented tactical crisis. German pilots quickly realized that direct attacks or close pursuit were now extremely dangerous. A single P-47 could fire hundreds of rounds in seconds from above, tearing an aircraft into fragments without requiring pinpoint accuracy. Traditional tactics like head-on attacks or close-range dogfighting were no longer effective. Instead of dominating the air, German pilots now had to focus on survival, avoiding direct confrontation and minimizing risk. A clear example came during the Schweinfurt-Regensburg air battles and B-17 escort missions deep into Germany in 1943. German pilots initially doubted reports of America's massive production capacity, but when confronted with the overwhelming number of P-47s, they had to accept the reality. These battles not only inflicted aircraft losses on Germany, but also caused psychological panic. Many German pilots watched comrades shredded before their eyes, with no chance to bail out or counterattack, creating immense mental pressure. Unlike the P-51 Mustang, notable for speed and range, the P-47 stood out for its synchronized firepower and survivability under concentrated fire. When facing a P-47, German pilots had to consider every shot, as a single mistake could be fatal. Meanwhile, American pilots could fire multiple successive volleys, experimenting with different tactics without fear of running out of ammunition. This created a profound psychological difference, forcing German pilots to adapt by avoiding combat and striking only when the enemy was isolated or weakened. The P-47's impact extended beyond the air. Equipped with bombs and rockets, it became extremely effective in ground attack roles. German vehicles, trains, and military bases became easy targets. German pilots and troops described P-47 strafing as an unstoppable force of destruction, where any target entering its fire zone was almost certainly destroyed. The combination of altitude, speed, and overwhelming firepower could break German formations in just minutes. Moreover, differences in pilot training and experience created a severe strategic disadvantage. By 1944, the U.S. was training over 100,000 pilots annually, each with more than 200 hours of flight before being assigned to a P-47. In contrast, due to fuel and aircraft shortages, German pilot training fell from 250 hours pre-war to under 50 hours by late 1944. Many German pilots fired cannons in combat for the first time, facing seasoned American pilots in fully armed P-47s. As a result, encounters became less about skill and more like facing a reaper from the skies. Luftwaffe records indicate that the survival rate for new pilots after 1944 was extremely low. Those trained after June 1944 had less than a 15% chance of surviving their first 5 missions, and against the P-47, survival dropped below 10%. Entire German squadrons could be wiped out in a single engagement with Thunderbolts. Pilots no longer fought to win, they fought to survive. This forced a radical shift in Luftwaffe tactics. German pilots developed survival strategies, including attacking only isolated or damaged aircraft, avoiding engagements above 20,000 feet where P-47s dominated, avoiding head-on attacks against 8 synchronized guns, immediately disengaging upon encountering a P-47. These tactics were no longer about victory. They were about survival, reflecting extreme psychological pressure and helplessness in the face of overwhelming firepower. The psychological impact extended to ground engagements and the D-Day campaign of 1944. On the day of the Normandy landings, the Luftwaffe flew only 319 sorties, while the U.S. 9th Air Force deployed over 2,000 P-47 missions. When German pilots appeared, they faced a wall of synchronized firepower capable of destroying any pilot within seconds. P-47s not only protected bombers but also attacked and destroyed vehicles, trains, and supply depots, crippling the Luftwaffe and German forces' operational capability. Resource and logistics differences compounded the advantage. P-47s were fully equipped with fuel and ammunition, whereas German pilots faced limited fuel and sparse ammunition, forcing life-or-death calculations with every engagement. American pilots, by contrast, could operate confidently and proactively. The long-term impact was psychological trauma. Luftwaffe doctors documented P-47 nerves, in which pilots reacted to sounds resembling the 8.50 caliber guns with stress, shaking, or panic. Survivors developed instinctive survival tactics, such as immediately retreating upon hearing P-47 engines, avoiding combat above 20,000 feet, and focusing on easier low-altitude targets. In this way, the P-47 did not merely win battles, it reshaped the Luftwaffe's entire tactics and combat psychology. German pilots went from sky knights to survival-focused warriors, fighting not for victory, but to escape death under overwhelming fire. American tactics, combining superior design, immense firepower, and industrial production capacity, created an overwhelming advantage in both air and ground operations. The P-47 became a symbol of industrial warfare, where production, logistics, and strategic design determined outcomes rather than individual skill. German pilots realized that no amount of finesse could overcome superior firepower and America's endless production capacity. The results on the battlefield reflected this dominance. During D-Day and subsequent operations, the P-47 achieved complete air superiority and conducted devastating ground attacks, destroying vehicles, trains, supply depots, and German troops. While the Luftwaffe suffered severe losses in pilots and aircraft, the P-47 continued to operate effectively with minimal attrition thanks to its firepower, design, and unlimited resources. Thus, the P-47 was not only an outstanding fighter, but also a tool that fundamentally changed tactics, psychology, and the course of the war in Europe. It demonstrated that in the era of industrial warfare, production capacity and overwhelming firepower outweighed personal skill or traditional tactics. German pilots had to learn to survive the P-47, and these lessons had lasting effects on military thinking after the war, particularly as many became NATO advisors and shared combat experience with the U.S. As the P-47 Thunderbolt continued to be deployed widely across the skies of Europe, its impact went far beyond aerial combat or the temporary survival tactics of the Luftwaffe. The aircraft became a symbol of American industrial power, demonstrating that mass production, overwhelming firepower, and coordinated tactics could decisively alter the outcome of a war. This reality was evident in numerous battles from 1943 to 1945, where the P-47 not only protected bomber forces but also dominated German pilots in every aspect. Military analysts note that the appearance of the P-47 shattered all traditional tactical assumptions of the Luftwaffe. Previously, the Germans believed that pilot skill and firing accuracy were decisive factors. But the P-47 proved that no individual skill could counter overwhelming firepower when American planes carried 8 synchronized 50-caliber machine guns capable of creating a broad destructive zone within standard firing range. Each 15-second burst from a P-47 discharged over 1,600 rounds, with a total weight of 171 pounds of metal and explosive compounds. In comparison, a Bf-109G carried only a single 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns with a limited supply of ammunition, highlighting a stark and serious disparity. This firepower advantage was further amplified by superior altitude performance and engine capabilities. Equipped with a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WASP engine with a turbo supercharger, the P-47 could maintain high speed and maneuverability even at 25,000 feet, where German aircraft struggled. P-47 pilots developed the high-altitude bounce tactic, approaching from above at nearly 500 mph, delivering devastating fire, and then using momentum to climb back to a safe altitude. German pilots described these attacks as death from above, nearly impossible to defend against. The combination of the plane's large weight, overwhelming firepower, and rapid climb capability quickly made the P-47 a tactical nightmare for the Luftwaffe. Beyond air-to-air combat, the P-47 proved highly effective in ground attack roles, reshaping the outcome of the Normandy campaign and other operations. Equipped with bombs and rockets, a single P-47 could destroy convoys, trains, and supply depots in a single sortie. This destructive power forced German forces to hide or move at night, slowing deployments and reducing operational effectiveness. Post-war records indicate that in many engagements, a single P-47 could completely paralyze a supply route, turning German forces into easy targets for follow-up attacks. The P-47's dominance was further reinforced by American production and logistics. Factories in Evansville, Indiana, and Farmingdale, New York, reached maximum capacity, producing up to 840 P-47s per month, nearly half of Germany's total fighter production. Overall, the U.S. produced 15,686 P-47s during the war, along with 125,488 M2 machine guns and over 12 billion 50-caliber rounds, providing every P-47 pilot with surplus ammunition for hundreds of missions. This meant German pilots were disadvantaged not only in skill and technology, but also in resources and sustainability. Unlike American pilots, German pilots often flew with limited ammunition and fuel, where every shot was a life-or-death decision. The P-47's combat effectiveness was evident in major engagements. During the D-Day campaign, P-47s protected bombers, attacked vehicles and supply trains, and dominated German pilots. The Luftwaffe flew only 319 sorties on the first day of the invasion, while P-47s flew over 2,000, downing at least 27 German aircraft, while the U.S. lost only 16. This created a more than 4.1 air superiority ratio, demonstrating absolute dominance in firepower, technology, and resources. Beyond numbers, the P-47 had a lasting psychological impact. German pilots developed near-automatic reactions to the sound of 8 synchronized guns, from panic and shaking to immediate survival-driven tactical adjustments. Some pilots who later served in NATO, observing F-84 Thunderjet ground attacks, experienced stress reactions, showing that the P-47's psychological effect extended beyond World War II, influencing military perceptions of overwhelming firepower. Meanwhile, trained American pilots in fully equipped P-47s with high survivability had a roughly 90% survival rate, far surpassing German pilots facing P-47s, whose survival rate was below 30%. This difference was not about personal skill, but reflected fundamental disparities in production capacity, logistics, and tactical design. The P-47 was not merely a combat tool, it was a strategic weapon, reshaping air and ground campaigns across Europe. With later variants like the P-47M and P-47N, Thunderbolt dominance was further reinforced. The P-47M, powered by a 2,800 HP R2857C engine, capable of speeds over 470 mph, and equipped with the K-14 automatic gun sight, eliminated any advantage of German pilot gunnery skill, making even less experienced pilots deadly in combat. The P-47 thus became the embodiment of American military philosophy: industrial production and overwhelming firepower, where quantity, production, and logistics determined victory rather than personal skill or traditional tactics. The P-47's dominance demonstrated that modern warfare is an industrial game, not a contest of knights. Each sortie not only destroyed targets, but taught German pilots a painful lesson about the nature of war. Superior production and firepower deployment determine victory. The combination of advanced design, synchronized firepower, durability, and mass production created a comprehensive war machine, dominating both air and ground operations. Post-war analyses confirmed that the P-47's strategic impact went far beyond individual fighter metrics. It protected bomber forces, destroying German industry, attacked supply lines and vehicles, and created psychological dominance and crisis within the Luftwaffe. German pilots' survival rates plummeted, traditional tactics collapsed, and precise nightly air combat became obsolete. The P-47 not only changed the war but also shaped modern military thinking, emphasizing that industrial strength and overwhelming firepower are decisive over individual skill or refined tactics. Ultimately, the P-47 Thunderbolt was not just an outstanding fighter. It was a symbol of American industrial warfare, where design, production, logistics, training, and coordinated tactics combined to generate total combat power. German pilots learned a harsh lesson. In modern war, the nation capable of producing and deploying overwhelming firepower will dominate, and the P-47, with its 8 synchronized machine guns, was the living embodiment of that lesson. Looking back at the entire air war over Europe, the P-47 Thunderbolt was recognized not only as one of the most powerful fighter aircraft, but also as a symbol of American industrial strength and the philosophy of modern warfare. What the P-47 accomplished went far beyond conventional dogfights. It reshaped tactics, mindset, and the operational approach of opposing air forces. First, in terms of tactics, the P-47 demonstrated that overwhelming firepower combined with high-altitude capability and superior speed could completely overshadow enemy pilots' skill. German pilots, proud of their precision gunnery, calculating flight paths, attack angles, and deflection tactics, suddenly realized that these methods were worthless against the P-47's 8 synchronized machine guns, which created a lethal zone within normal firing range. A single burst from a P-47 could reduce a German aircraft to pieces in seconds, leaving pilots powerless and panicked. The firepower of the P-47 was not merely a statistic. With 8 Browning M2 50 caliber guns, each loaded with 350 rounds, the P-47 could sustain continuous fire for 30 seconds, over 1,600 rounds per volley. The total weight of metal and explosives per burst reached 171 pounds, creating a destruction zone German aircraft could not evade. In comparison, German aircraft such as the Bf-109 or FW-190 had only a few 20mm and 13mm guns with limited ammunition, making every shot a careful consideration. This represented a difference in combat philosophy. The U.S. emphasized overwhelming sustained power, while Germany still relied on precision and individual skill. High-altitude performance and speed also gave the P-47 asymmetric strategic advantages. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine with turbo supercharger allowed American planes to maintain optimal performance above 25,000 feet, where German aircraft struggled. The Saab high-altitude bounce tactic became a nightmare for the Luftwaffe. The P-47 would dive from above, unleash devastating fire, and then use momentum to climb back to a safe altitude where the enemy could not follow. The aircraft's large weight, initially seen as a drawback, became an advantage in high-speed dives, giving it superior vertical maneuverability. Equally important was production and logistics, which made the P-47 the embodiment of industrial strength. Republic Aviation, starting as a small factory producing 39 aircraft in 1939, scaled up to 840 per month by 1944, nearly half of Germany's total fighter output. In total, the U.S. produced 15,686 P-47s, along with 125 out of 488 machine guns and over 12 billion to 50 caliber rounds, providing each pilot with surplus ammunition for hundreds of sorties. Abundant logistics allowed American pilots to act confidently, while German pilots constantly faced shortages and had to ration every shot, creating severe psychological strain. The P-47 also proved its versatility in ground attack roles, crippling convoys, trains, supply depots, and reinforcements. In major campaigns such as Normandy or Operation Bodenplatte, the P-47 destroyed strategic targets, preventing German forces from moving during daylight without suffering heavy losses. This capability, combined with aerial dominance, created a strategic vice. The Luftwaffe lost air superiority, ground forces were paralyzed, and Allied operations proceeded almost unimpeded. The psychological impact of the P-47 was significant. German pilots developed P-47 nerves, stress and panic at the sound of the 8 synchronized guns, avoidance of high-altitude engagements, and focusing only on vulnerable targets. Even NATO pilots post-war retained stress responses when observing ground attacks by similarly armed aircraft. The difference in mental resilience and combat pressure between U.S. and German pilots clearly reflected the comprehensive power of the P-47. In the long term, the P-47 shaped American military thinking, emphasizing overwhelming firepower, mass production, and sustained logistics rather than relying solely on individual skill. This philosophy deeply influenced U.S. fighter and weapons development during the Cold War, where every design considered production capacity and continuous firepower. German pilots, later serving in NATO, carried this lesson, emphasizing that in modern warfare, production capability and overwhelming firepower determine victory. Combat statistics underscore the P-47's strategic effectiveness. In the European theater, it achieved 3,752 aerial victories, destroyed 86,000 rail cars, 9,000 locomotives, and 68,000 vehicles, while U.S. losses totaled only 3,499 aircraft, including 1,020 to enemy action and the remainder to mechanical failure or flak. The air-to-air exchange ratio exceeded 4.1, demonstrating complete dominance in firepower, tactics, and production. Later variants, such as the P-47M and P-47N, upgraded engines, speed, and gun sights, effectively eliminating nearly all enemy shooting skill advantages. Even inexperienced pilots became formidable, showing that industry and technology could replace individual skill in modern warfare. The P-47, with 8 synchronized guns and tens of thousands of rounds, embodied industrial warfare, where production capacity, logistics, and coordinated tactics determined victory, not individual prowess. The strategic consequences extended to psychology, military education, and standards of warfare. The P-47 became a benchmark every modern army had to face. High production, overwhelming firepower, and unlimited logistics were decisive factors. Post-war U.S. and NATO military academies emphasized that modern warfare was industrial, not purely an art of individuals, with the P-47 as the prime example. Ultimately, the legacy of the P-47 was not just in kill counts or production figures, but in the comprehensive lesson it taught about modern warfare. It demonstrated that a nation could turn production capacity into tactical advantage, that overwhelming firepower could eclipse individual skill, and that combat psychology could be profoundly influenced by industrial dominance. German pilots painfully learned that modern war was not a contest of aerial knights, but a competition between industrial capabilities and effective deployment of force. The P-47 Thunderbolt, with its 50-caliber machine guns, speed, durability, ground attack capability, and production efficiency, became the living symbol of modern warfare, where victory was determined not by individuals, but by scale, firepower, and sustained operational capability. Every sortie was a lesson in industrial warfare philosophy, every engagement proof that the strongest industry, the best logistics, and overwhelming firepower prevail. In the memories of German pilots, the P-47 was a combination of fear, respect, and awe. In military history, the Thunderbolt stands as a monument to production capability, firepower, and comprehensive warfare, a testament that in the modern world, war is a game of industry, not merely individual skill or traditional tactics. This lesson transformed global Air Force thinking about warfare, strategy, and production, ensuring that the P-47's philosophy remains relevant in every era of modern conflict.